Most of us in the audience already know by this point that Thomas the Tank Engine is undoubtedly the most famous steam locomotive in popular culture, with the franchise being the most famous example of trains in popular culture. Ever since the TV show hit the big screen in 1984, his name has flooded railroad and railway media, from toys to children's stories to even the Day Out with Thomas events at heritage railways all over the world, including America's original heritage railway, the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. We also know that they have one of the best Day Out with Thomas programs in the world, with the replicas being some of the most accurate to the iconic British blue tank engine. But what is less known is also perhaps the most frequently asked question Strasburg ever gets, which is befittingly the title of this video: where did Strasburg get a Thomas replica from? Or at least one of them, since... Oh, wait. Editor? Aren't there little children in the audience? Oh. Right, yes, at least a few. It's Thomas. Right. Whoops. I probably should have warned you ahead of time that this may spoil the magic and fun of the events. So, first of all, I should advise that if you'd rather not let the magic of the event be spoiled in front of your kids, that you have 15 seconds after I finish this sentence to click away from this video. Okay, we good? Great. And that is because, even to mature rail fans like me, you, and to people of all ages from second grader to the elderly, the answer to this question is long and possibly going to irritate a few of us. Though, with some fair compensation, hopefully that all makes sense by the end. With all said, it's story time of how Strasburg got a Thomas replica. Where did they get it from? And why it doesn't work like an E2. This is about to get very indirect and more complicated the further back in time we go. The long answer to this story began all the way back in March of 1917 when H.K. Porter Incorporated completed construction of Brooklyn East District Terminal number 15, an oil-burning 060 saddle tank engine. From the day of its arrival on the BETD until its retirement on Christmas Day of 1963, the 15 worked as a dockside switcher locomotive moving freight cars around the docks to be interchanged with other railroads and shipping companies. 2 years after being withdrawn and replaced by diesel locomotives, effectively making the short line the last railroad in New York to run steam locomotives in revenue freight service, the 15 was bought by the Southern Appalachian Railway and refurbished for occasional operation. She even visited the Yancey Railroad for a few unsuccessful steam trips between Mickaville and Kona in 1968. Following the unsuccessful trips, the little tank engine was stored in Burnsville, North Carolina until it was bought by the Toledo, Lake Erie and Western Railway in Grand Rapids, Ohio to be put on display in 1975. From that point on, it seemed like the 15 was to finally endure a peaceful retirement for the rest of its life. But in 1998, it all changed when the 15 was sold to the Strasburg Railroad to be used in excursion service and arrived on their property on May 9th of that year. But during a few test runs, the 15 was not only problematic, unsurprising since it hadn't moved under its own power since 1968, but the water tanks were also found to be too small to run the entire round trip without a potential risk of running out of water, possibly causing a crown sheet failure, and ultimately, a boiler explosion. Around the same time that 15 arrived at Strasburg, the British film producer Britt Allcroft, who was directing the ill-fated film Thomas and the Magic Railroad at the time, visited Strasburg to get permission for the studio to film a few scenes at the railroad, of which include those involving Norfolk and Western 475 and at Shining Time Station. While negotiating, this made Strasburg think up an idea. When they presented it to her, Allcroft was thrilled with the idea and gave Strasburg the approval to make it happen. That same thing was the next thing Strasburg did to the 15, but also the most controversial decision they ever made. See, later that same year in 1998, Strasburg began a full rebuild on the 15. But wait, you may ask, the water tanks were too small, and they knew it. The only changes they make to the locomotives are just cosmetic in the form of the paint, but no mechanical changes, right? Wrong. Because when the 15 emerged from the shops again on April 14th of 1999 when the restoration finished, the locomotive didn't look anything like its original form. This is what you were just hinted at with that most controversial decision it ever made phrase. Strasburg not only refurbished 15 all the way through, but they also converted it into a fully functioning standard gauge replica of Thomas with a new cab, bunker, side tanks, and whistle. On top of it, they converted the locomotive to burn coal just like the Thomas from the books and show. A new British-style running board, lamp irons, cowcatcher, and Stag Thomas face on the front of the smokebox were fitted, though the latter was replaced with an animatronic face from the CGI saga in April of 2014. The face can move its mouth and has a speaker with voice recordings from Martin Sheeman, who was Thomas's American voice actor in the show from 2009 to 2015, as well as for Percy in that same time, and Devious Diesel in 2013. And of course, he was repainted blue with bits of red, gray, and yellow. The original frame, boiler, and running gear were reused. Ever since that happened, the 15 in its rebuilt form as a functioning Thomas and renumbered to 1 has been operated in tourist service during the annual Day Out with Thomas events at Strasburg since April 29th of 1999. And the rebuild itself solved the issue of the water tanks being too small because they can now carry enough water for a round trip without running dangerously low, hence why it was even finished. In addition, Strasburg has also built 5 dummy Thomases and a dummy Percy that are pushed around by another locomotive and seen at various other tourist railroads in America. Now, I know that History in the Dark said that the Day Out with Thomas events are used to fund their operations due to the amount of money the events make them, but I was not successful in finding the exact amount in numbers, let alone what source he got such information from. It's, at most, kinda true, because it's not proven, although 3 of the 2001 events managed to attract 76,000 riders alone, and considering that the railroad does attract over 300,000 a year as of 2023, which also does make it the most visited railroad in the mainland United States. Speaking of which, this Thomas has occasionally visited other railroads for their Day Out with Thomas events, including the Illinois Railway Museum, the Greenfield Village Line, the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad, and the Belvedere and Delaware River Railway. As previously stated, rebuilding 15 is the most controversial thing Strasburg has ever done. They'd never destroy a steam locomotive, let alone preserved ones, just let them up a bit differently if they wanted to, run and maintain them. It is the original heritage railway of America, so the idea of them converting an existing locomotive into a different kind does technically go against everything they stand for in railroad preservation. But on the inside of that Thomas replica, he is still Brooklyn East District Terminal 15, due to its reuse of the original boiler, frame, and running gear. And even though it's now in a way a different model of steam locomotive, 15 isn't the only, but one of 5 surviving tank engines from the BETD. The others in question being identical sister locomotive 14 at the Ulster and Delaware Railroad Historical Society in Arkville, New York, and 3 similar locomotives with differing side tanks than 15. On top of it, the rebuild has now made the locomotive able to run Strasburg's Day Out with Thomas events with enough fuel, and in the process, make a ton of money needed for their operations so they can continue to preserve delicate railroad history for future generations of what it was like to travel on America's railroads in the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the process, provide memorable and famously enjoyable experiences, especially for young children, their families, and even just casual rail fans that last a lifetime. So even if this decision was controversial, it turned out to be a good one that gave the locomotive a wonderful second chance in operating tourist service that otherwise would have landed it back in a museum. Also, the London, Brighton, and South Coast E2s, which Thomas is based on, were pretty terrible, and the polar opposite about Thomas was in the show. or in other words, useless. They'd all been cut up by 1963, right after the end of steam in America, and Thomas wouldn't be as famous until the TV show released in the 1980s. In fact, nowhere near as famous, by the way. So it's not like Strasburg would have a good reason to save an E2, spend so much money on importing it to the United States, and then just squishing it into a shorter wheelbase to fix all the E2's problems back in 1963, when they only just became a tourist line, America had completely dieselized its railroads, and Thomas was just the star of a children's book series, with no other adaptations. Also, I'm pretty sure they could have never had the money to get some other British tank engine with outside cylinders to convert that to a Thomas replica. Even now, so... In other words, there's no way Strasburg would have ever gotten their hands on an E2. And with that melodramatic conclusion, that is the story of how Strasburg got their own Thomas replica, thus answering the question of where and how they got it from, and why it has outside cylinders. And this is also my first fully narrated video to be edited not using Old Movie Maker, oh no, but a new and much better one called Can Live, which also took a lot of time to get used to, but I'm sure it'll pay off in every quality aspect, especially audio quality, hopefully. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, subscribe to my channel and activate notifications so that you don't miss future uploads. I'm the Rocket City Railfan, also known as Andrew Rail of Amherst, or simply just Andrew, and thanks for watching!